Welcome to today's explainer. Most startups absolutely dream of getting customers fast. They obsess over it. And early on, a company called Homejoy actually had that exact problem. But, in a good way. People were signing up in droves, booking cleanings, and trying the service out in their own homes. Honestly, from the outside looking in, the whole thing looked like a massive, undeniable success. But as we're going to see today, there was this one glaring problem that nobody seemed to notice at first. Most of those customers, they never came back. And that single, seemingly small detail quietly destroyed the entire company. Let's unpack exactly how that happened.
So the central mystery we're looking at today is pretty simple. Why did customers leave so quickly? Because on paper, everything was working. Homejoy was successfully getting people through the digital door. Users were downloading the app, putting in their credit card info, and scheduling that very first cleaning. But then, crickets. If you were an observer back then, or even an early employee, you'd see those top-line numbers soaring and think, wow, we've got a major hit on our hands. But beneath the surface, that massive turnover was creating a fatal crack in the foundation. To really get why this was so devastating, we kind of need to rewind and look at what Homejoy actually was.
At its core, Homejoy was a beautifully simple idea. Picture this, a really sleek, modern app interface. You pull out your phone, tap a few buttons, and boom, a professional is scheduled to come make your house spotless. It basically took the affordable, on-demand convenience of things like ride-sharing or food delivery and brought it straight into your living room. It was highly appealing, super marketable, and just incredibly easy for a consumer to say yes to trying out.
And because it was so appealing, the idea spread like wildfire across major cities. We're talking aggressive geographical expansion and massive user growth, which of course led to incredibly excited investors pouring in capital. If you were reading the tech blogs at the time, Homejoy looked like the literal textbook definition of hockey stick growth. Everyone was totally fixated on that shiny exterior. To the rest of the world, this was a massive, undeniable win.
But here's where we really need to slow down and look at the hidden reality. To fuel all that rapid city-by-city expansion, Homejoy was pouring absolutely massive budgets into Google and Facebook ads. They were offering these deep discounts just to lure people in for a first cleaning. Essentially, they were subsidizing people's house cleaning just to get them in the door. The reality, though, people took the discount, got their super cheap cleaning, and then just vanished. Zero repeat usage. There was absolutely no long-term relationship being built.
So what we have here is a classic massive retention problem. They were successfully paying high customer acquisition costs, which, let's be fair, is totally normal for a growing startup, but they were completely failing to recoup those costs. I mean, if users leave after just one heavily subsidized cleaning, the fundamental math of the business completely falls apart. You simply cannot build a sustainable enterprise off a bunch of one-time deal hunters. And this dynamic created a cyclical cash burn, a truly dangerous loop. Think about it. They pay heavily for ads to acquire a customer. That customer gets their incredibly discounted cleaning and then never books again. Since the revenue from that single trip was tiny compared to what they spent on marketing, Homejoy lost money. And to keep those top-line growth numbers looking good for their investors, they had to jump right back into the market and basically buy another loss-making customer.
Which leads us to this really fascinating disconnect. Every single time they entered a new city, their user base predictably spiked. The bars on the charts just kept trending rapidly upward. On the surface, the company is getting bigger and bigger. But because of that dangerous loop we just talked about, a fatal flaw was hiding right inside the data. All that growth, it was a complete mirage.
Because the dark side of that growth was that while user numbers went up, the financial losses plunged straight into the red. With their retention broken, more growth literally just meant more spending. The business didn't break in one sudden dramatic explosion. Instead, it bled to death quietly, losing a little bit more money with absolutely every new download. The faster they grew, the faster they burned cash.
And ultimately, you just can't outrun that kind of math forever. Eventually, the investors, who had been totally dazzled by the initial growth, looked closer at those widening financial losses and, well, they stepped back. Without a constant stream of outside funding to prop up the illusion, the whole model stopped working. The company was forced to shut down. Not because nobody wanted a cleaning service, but because not enough people wanted to pay full price for a second one.
This brings us to one of the most overlooked yet absolutely crucial lessons in the startup world. Getting customers is not the same as building a business. Literally anyone with a big enough advertising budget can buy a first-time user, especially if you hand them a giant discount. But a company survives on loyalty, on quality, and on a business model that can actually sustain itself.
So, what you should really take away from this explainer is this. Growth is just expensive noise if your customers don't return. Let that resonate for a second.
It wasn't a lack of initial interest that killed Homejoy. The market was definitely there. The fatal wound was the complete inability to generate repeat behavior. When your retention is broken, your marketing budget isn't an investment anymore. It's a furnace. Which leaves us with one final vital question. Whether you're looking at a massive tech startup, a local small business, or maybe even a new product you're building yourself, before you even think about scaling, you absolutely must answer this. Why would customers come back? What is the core value that turns a one-time transaction into a long-term relationship? Because if they don't return, the question isn't how fast you'll grow, the question is just how fast you'll burn. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this autopsy of Homejoy gave you a fresh perspective on business growth. Catch you next time.